Good morning. I will start by just talking a little bit about how disappointed I am. Those of you who heard me just a few minutes ago on the floor, I was pretty frustrated by the fact that the first bill out of the House this year was the Born Alive Abortion Act, which is truly just a gift to the Freedom Caucus to score some political points in a campaign year, rather than actually addressing the things that Missourians keep telling us that they are worried about. They're worried about affordability. They're worried about federal overreach. They're worried about keeping, the government out of their lives. They're worried about paying for childcare. They're worried about so many other things. They voted on abortion in 2024. They made their voices heard. Yet here we are with a Republican-led supermajority in the Missouri House prioritizing a bill that basically duplicates existing law. It is already illegal to kill a human being in this state. To say I'm disappointed in the majority party is an understatement, and I just think that this is the exact thing that Missourians continue to be disappointed in their elected officials. In addition to that, this week in the budget committee, we heard, or I should say, last week in the Budget Committee, there was a discussion of a line item for Governor Parsons' 57 Foundation, which is asking for $250,000, 125 of which would be from TANF funds, which, as we know, is earmarked for the neediest folks in this state. The most marginalized and underserved folks in this state deserve to receive those funds. And so there was really no clear answer about what these dollars would do, how they would serve needy Missourians. It appears that the primary focus of the 57 Foundation is to educate Missourians about the life and legacy of Governor Parson. And, with such little transparency in a year where there's so many cuts happening to programs that are tried and true, that have data to show the good they're doing in our communities, this is just another example of, misspending and lack of transparency from the Kehoe administration. And I've got Betsy Fogel here. We're happy to take questions if y'all have any.
In the Born Alive Survivors Act, how would you explain that to someone if they're asking, what does this bill do?
I would say that it indicates, it does two things. One, it says that it's illegal to murder an infant in the state, which is already illegal, and it adds additional penalties onto providers. Providers already deal with malpractice coverage, and there are already laws and regulations in place to keep patients and doctors safe, and this is nothing more than campaign messaging.
I noticed they put a number of bills on the informal calendar in order to get to voting on the two that you did today, including that anti-human trafficking one that seemed pretty popular. Do you know why that one wasn't voted on today?
I believe that the Republican leadership and just the process by which committees get noticed up failed to notice up fiscal review in time to get that out of the House today. So here we are.
What do you think the message is that the leadership is sending by putting these specific bills first?
I think it's pretty clear that Missouri Republicans continue to focus on wedge issues. They continue to focus on the things that divide Missourians. They continue to focus on things that Missourians are not talking about day in and day out. Again, Missourians are talking about whether or not they can afford groceries. They're talking about our roads and bridges crumbling in their communities. They're talking about workforce development initiatives and how we can attract better jobs to this state for better opportunities, not only for folks currently in the workforce, but for the future workforce of Missouri. We're hemorrhaging young people from this state, but here we are focused on this. This is absolutely the wrong thing for the Missouri legislature to be focused on, and I think Missourians can see that.
On the budget, haven't been able to be in every hearing, but I was curious if there are things that you've identified where the legislature has passed legislation that costs money that now the administration or the majority is unwilling to spend.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that conversation has come up several times this appropriating cycle, notably in the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. A lot of the components in bills that have been passed in the last year or two We passed, with overwhelming support in both the House and the Senate. And then as the budget has made its way through the process so far this year, the governor has chosen to not expend the funds on some of those promises that were made through the legislative process in the last year or two.
Can you identify any
Is that
particular?
770, right? Is that the name of the bill?
727.
Yeah, I was going to say, in 727, it was a big education bill, lots of components, lots of smaller bills wrapped up into that. Several items that were a component of that are not reflected in this budget year. Some of the additional spend or new calculations for the foundation formula, we have about $190 million that the foundation formula calls for, in part because of some of the legislation that's passed over the last few years. Those are not incorporated into the governor's recommendations.
On the TANF funds, they've been a favorite place to go for lawmakers looking for a small earmark for an organization that is helping their community out. Well, the main reason we have TANF funds are payments to families, and the amounts that are paid out have not been increased since Governor Ashcroft did it in 1991 when it was aid to families with dependent children. Is there a way to get those payments up outside of a gubernatorial order that the need is greater than it is now?
We receive roughly $260 million in TANF funding at the state level and have received that number, at least according to the department, for the last several years. We have had serious conversations this year and will continue to have them about the best utilization of TANF funds. Last year, at the end of the legislative process, we had over-appropriated the TANF line by tens of millions of dollars. This year, you saw some reductions in some important services because we had to balance out that and get below the $216 million line. We are going to continue to have a lot of conversations about the best utilization of the $260 million of TANF funds, one notably mentioned by Rep. Ani earlier. I would argue that's not the best utilization of those dollars. In terms of how, to answer your question, I don't know if I have a specific answer other than to say that $260 million is what the state gets, and I would anticipate that that's the number we're going to get unless there are changes at the federal level about how TANF dollars flow.
Right, but a family that is receiving TANF payments, family of three, gets $271 a month. And like I said, that number has not changed since 1991.
Correct.
If these monies should go more directly to the people that are supposed to get them, is there a way that the legislature can raise that, and should the legislature?
That's a great question. The honest answer, I don't know. I don't know how, if statutorily we could change, if we could implement language in the budget or how we would change that, but happy to look into and get back with you.
Democrats pointed out a couple years ago with Senate Bill 727 that there wasn't prescribed funding mechanisms for all the things that were being put in the bill, with kind of reassurances that it would be going. A few years later, we're already looking at not fully funding those obligations. What do you make of that, and what do you make of that kind of looking back?
The argument that I think the majority party would make is that everything is subject to appropriations. And though I agree with that, that doesn't change the promises that we make when we pass bills. When we are passing a piece of legislation, we are also consenting to the fiscal note that's associated with that piece of legislation, both in things that are going to cost our state money and in things that are going to reduce revenues to the state of Missouri, notably the capital gains elimination tax. Democrats stood on this very floor and the floor on the other side of the building and shouted that the fiscal note on that was going to be significantly larger than originally associated with the capital gains elimination. For those of you who follow the state budget, you know that general revenue report was made public this week, and we would anticipate that the capital gains elimination costing in year one roughly $500 million net loss to general revenue. So I think when we are both making promises in ways of spending money and then also making promises of what revenue reductions are going to look like, it's important that we're accurate and we uphold those promises. I can think of many examples of times that we have passed legislation in the year before, and then fast forward a year, we sit in a budget room and we tell the departments we want them to enact these things, but don't give them a penny to do it, and they can't enact programs unless the General Assembly decides to fund them.
Final budget question for me is, there's more than $2 billion that's set aside that came from general revenue for various things. I-70, I-44, $600 million for the Capital Commission. There are a couple other smaller ones. Is there any sentiment on Democratic side to claw back some of that money to general revenue?
I think kind of in line with my last answer, those were, in my mind, promises that we made to invest in some of these, like the I-44 funding, the I-70 funding. My commitment to those projects has remained. My scrutiny and my time in the budget room will be spent on any new promises going forward. There are places in the budget that are new decision items, and I think those should be treated with a different level of scrutiny, and places in the budget where we are making significant cuts that are going to impact the real lives of families across the state of Missouri. And of course, for me, sitting in the budget room, I'm uncomfortable spending any dollar on any program that is not going to enrich and provide investments for the next generation. And I would argue that there are places in the budget right now that aren't doing that.
Leader Ani, the Attorney General recently filed a lawsuit, amazingly, about redoing the 2020 census to count non-citizens. What do you make of this, sort of going back 5 years and relitigating the 2020 election and then changing the way the census works?
Well, I will start by saying I have not read that lawsuit. I am actually not familiar with it, but relitigating the 2020 election is one of the most exhausting headlines I continue to see nationally, certainly. But to see our Attorney General jumping on that bandwagon is, I suppose, par for the course here in Missouri. Happy to get back with you on that, though. Anything else? All right. Have a great weekend, y'all.